the garage Richard Petty has never let anyone see. In the small town of Level Cross, North Carolina, there's a building no outsider has ever fully walked through. Not journalists, not documentary crews, not the wealthiest collectors who've flown in with checkbooks ready. Richard Petty has said no to every one of them. Behind those doors sits somewhere between 15 and 20 race cars, piled together and left untouched for generations, alongside objects that have never been shown to the public. The real mystery isn't what any of it is worth. It's why the winningest driver NASCAR has ever produced has spent decades refusing to let anyone see it, and what that refusal says about the man himself. The numbers that make this story matter. Before getting into what's inside that garage, it helps to grasp the scale of what Richard Petty accomplished, because without that context, the content is just old metal and forgotten paperwork. 200. That's how many NASCAR Cup Series races Petty won across a career, running from 1958 to 1992. The second name on that list, David Pearson, sits at 105 wins. Petty nearly doubled the next best total in history. 7 championships. 7 Daytona 500 wins. 123 poles. 513 consecutive starts between 1971 and 1989. Over 1,100 career starts across 35 seasons. These aren't records rivals chipped away at over time. They sit so far out of reach that the sport largely stopped treating them as targets and started treating them as permanent fixtures instead. Petty Enterprises, the family team his father Lee founded in Level Cross in 1949, became the most decorated operation in NASCAR history. Lee won 3 championships before handing the number 43 car to his son. Richard's brother Maurice built the engines behind most of those 200 wins, and their cousin Dale Inman ran the pit box as crew chief for the bulk of his career. For members of one family, all inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, the compound where it all happened is still standing, and the garage at its center has stayed closed to outsiders for as long as anyone can remember. Why 15 buried race cars is a bigger deal than it sounds. Petty has said he never thought much about saving old race cars while he was actively competing. In the 1960s and 70s, a used race car was just a used race car. Teams needed money to build the next one. So cars got sold off, stripped for parts, or abandoned outright. Petty has admitted selling several of his own to West Coast racers for whatever he could get, because nobody imagined a battered stock car would someday be worth a fortune. Nobody thought to preserve them, so they didn't. The cars that didn't get sold, too damaged or too tangled up in other work to move, ended up stacked behind the garage. Petty has put the number at 15 to 20, sitting exposed in a field for decades, uncatalogued and uncovered. What those cars represent historically is hard to calculate. What they represent in terms of preservation lost is something Petty has discussed with more honesty than most legends offer. He knows what slipped away. The cars that did survive were kept for different reasons entirely. Nothing to do with resale value. Everything to do with what they meant to the people who built and drove them. A car kept for its auction price is a financial asset. A car kept because of what happened behind the wheel on one specific afternoon is something money was never attached to. The garage in Level Cross is full of the second kind, the Superbird and the car that started it all. 2 vehicles inside that garage sit at opposite ends of Petty's career and together tell the whole story. The first is a Plymouth Superbird, built in 1970 to exploit NASCAR's aerodynamic rules of the era. Its pointed nose cone and oversized rear wing weren't styling choices. They were engineering solutions from Chrysler's racing division, meant to cut drag and add downforce near 200 miles per hour. Petty won 18 races in Plymouth that season, and the Superbird became permanently linked to his number 43. The one in Level Cross has never been restored or cleaned for display. Tire debris still clings to the undercarriage. The body still carries marks from contact that happened decades ago and was never addressed, because the car was never meant to be a showpiece. A comparable Superbird with Petty's provenance would be one of the most significant pieces of American motorsport history available anywhere. It's never been made available anywhere. The second car is older and far less glamorous, and in some ways more significant. A 1957 Oldsmobile, hand-built by Lee Petty and his sons in that same garage. The car Richard drove in his NASCAR debut. Crude by any measure, rusted the way steel rusts when it's kept for what it means rather than what it's worth. If the Superbird represents the peak of what Petty became, the Oldsmobile represents the moment before any of it existed. When a 20-year-old from a small North Carolina town first pointed a car at a racetrack and found out what he was made of, both sit under the same roof. Neither has ever been for sale. The back room almost no one has entered. Past the cars and tools, at the back of the main garage, there's a smaller room. Former Petty Enterprises employees have described it over the years. It's not on any tour route and appears in no museum materials. A place where things too personal for public display were quietly set aside. What's reportedly kept there goes beyond cars and trophies. There are boxes of fan letters from the 1960s and 70s, many never opened. Kept not because Petty planned to answer them, but because throwing them out was never something he could do. Letters from children, veterans, strangers who found something in watching him race and felt compelled to write it down. He kept every one. There are also items connected to Dale Earnhardt Sr., who died at Daytona International Speedway on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. Petty and Earnhardt spent 2 decades as rivals with completely different personalities and driving styles, who developed a mutual respect deeper than most of what gets said publicly in the sport. Those who've seen what Petty kept from that relationship describe the objects less as souvenirs and more as the kind of things you hold on to when someone who understood you is suddenly gone. There's also reportedly the twisted frame from Petty's most serious crash, the 1980 wreck at Pocono Raceway, where his car went airborne and rolled multiple times before absorbing an impact that has ended careers in the sport. Petty walked away. The frame was kept exactly as it came out of the wreckage, never straightened or cleaned. He's never explained why. Those who've seen it say the reason is obvious the moment you're standing in front of it. The offers he turned down, and what saying no cost him. Putting a dollar figure on everything inside is difficult, since so little has ever been offered for sale. People who've assessed parts of the collection have suggested the total value. Cars, memorabilia, setup notes, race-worn gear, keepsakes, could reach 8 figures depending on market conditions. Petty has received plenty of offers, from private collectors and from institutions floating rotating exhibits. None of it has gone anywhere. He's turned down every serious offer, not because he disputes the value, but because the value was never the point. Nothing in that garage was accumulated as an investment. It was kept because letting it go would mean letting go of something with no replacement. What makes those refusals more striking is the financial pressure Petty Enterprises faced in its final years, as the sport grew increasingly expensive and corporate to the late 1990s and early 2000s. Petty brought an outside investment and tried several restructuring plans before rebranding the operation as Petty's Garage in 2008, shifting focus entirely to custom builds and restoration. During those lean years, the garage's contents represented a financial cushion Petty never touched. Collectors knew what was in there, and offers came in specifically because the timing made a yes seem more plausible. He turned those down too. The garage was never a financial instrument, and no balance sheet was going to turn it into one. The Petty family's public museum, founded by Richard's late wife Linda in 1988 and relocated to Level Cross in 2014, handles a side of the legacy meant to be shared. Championship cars, trophies, uniforms, all carefully arranged for visitors. It's well worth the trip, but it isn't a private garage and was never meant to be. The museum holds what Richard Petty chose to share. The garage holds what he didn't. What Kyle Petty and losing Adam changed. Richard Petty has been asked many times why he keeps so much of his history private. His answer has stayed consistent. Some things aren't for crowds. They're for the people who were there. Kyle Petty, Richard's son, raced professionally for more than 2 decades, carrying the family name into a 3rd generation. He spent time in the garage but doesn't film it or discuss it publicly. Richard's grandson Thad Moffitt, who competes in Truck Series racing, has also been inside, for the family. The garage functions like certain rooms in certain houses, a place where shared history is stored and occasionally revisited, without needing to be explained to anyone outside it. Kyle has spoken honestly about growing up in his father's shadow, winning 8 Cup Series races across 18 years. Respectable by any measure, yet constantly weighed against his father's 200. He's talked about how that garage meant something different to him than it did to the collectors who wanted access. To them, it was history. To Kyle, it was home. The same tools he watched his Uncle Maurice and his father use, the same cars he watched being built as a child. Everything shifted after Adam Petty died in May 2000 during a practice session at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. Adam was Kyle's son and Richard's grandson, 20 years old and already racing professionally, the fourth generation of Pettys in NASCAR. He died when his throttle stuck and his car struck the outside wall. He was the first fourth-generation professional athlete in any major American sport, gone before most fans ever learned his name. Kyle has said losing Adam reshaped everything he understood about the family legacy and what was worth protecting. Richard has spoken about it with the careful economy of someone choosing every word because none feel sufficient. The garage became something different after that. Opening any of it to commercial interest or public display stopped being something Petty had any interest in. That garage is where the family goes. It's where Lee Petty's tools still hang on the same hooks. It's where the frame of a wrecked car sits as a reminder that survival at those speeds was never guaranteed. It's where 4 generations of one family's relationship with a demanding sport is stored quietly in a building most people drive past without knowing what's inside. Richard Petty is well into his 80s now. He still shows up at Level Cross, still wears a cowboy hat and dark sunglasses that became part of American motorsports' visual identity, and still signs autographs for fans who make the trip. By every account, he remains exactly what he appears to be, warm, present, and genuinely interested in the people who came to find him. Petty's Garage, the custom build and restoration shop that replaced Petty Enterprises after 2008, still does work for customers wanting the craftsmanship the Petty name represents. Maurice Petty and Dale Inman, both in their 80s, helped recreate the 1964 Plymouth Belvedere Championship car the shop completed in recent years, working from original specs and their own memory of how those cars were built. 3 Hall of Fame members back under the same roof where the originals were built 6 decades earlier, not out of nostalgia, but craft applied with the same seriousness it always demanded. What that garage ultimately represents, beyond the dollar value and the personal history wrapped around every object, is an argument about what legacy actually means. Most of what gets called legacy in American sports is public. Halls of Fame, record books, highlight reels, built to be consumed by people who were never there. Richard Petty built the most dominant career the sport has ever seen, then went home to Level Cross and put the things that mattered most behind a closed door, not to protect their value, not to create mystery, but because some of what it cost him to become who he became was never meant to be sold, and he understood that clearly enough to act on it for the better part of 60 years. If Richard Petty ever opens that door to the world, will what's inside change how people understand what it really took to become the greatest driver NASCAR has ever known?